I was standing in the hallway of our apartment in Austin with a folder of documents in my hands, the kind you carry when you still believe things can be organized and fixed. Our lease renewal paperwork, a printout of our savings plan, a couple of lender pre-approval emails I'd highlighted like that meant something. Megan leaned against the wall near the kitchen entry, barefoot, arms loose at her sides. She didn't look guilty. She looked tired. Like I'd asked her to stay late at a meeting she didn't want to attend. She said it plainly, without drama. I slept with someone else. No build-up. No tears. No shaking voice. Just a sentence that landed and stayed. The air in the hallway felt different immediately, like the apartment had shifted a few inches off its foundation. I remember noticing the tiny scuff on the baseboard by the closet door, the one I'd promised myself I'd repaint someday. I remember the hum of the AC kicking on and how normal it sounded, like it hadn't heard what she just said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask who, not right away. I just stood there, holding my neat little folder like it was a shield. Megan watched me for a beat, then exhaled through her nose, almost annoyed, like my silence was inconvenient. "You're just too kind," she said. Calm, almost with mild irritation. Like kindness was the problem in the room. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not numb, not confused, just clear. There wasn't going to be a version of this where I talked my way back into my own life. There wasn't going to be a night where we cried and promised to do better and reset the clock. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was final. Before that night in the hallway, our life looked stable from the outside. Predictable in the way adult lives are supposed to be. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment in North Austin, close enough to downtown for her shoots, close enough to the tech corridor for my office. I worked for a mid-sized software company, operations side. Process, logistics, timelines. I liked knowing where things stood. Megan was building her photography portfolio. Lifestyle branding, rooftop portraits, engagement sessions around Lady Bird Lake. I paid most of the fixed expenses without keeping score. Rent, utilities, insurance. She covered groceries when a project paid out. We told ourselves it was temporary, that her business just needed time. At night, we'd sit on the couch with Zillow open, scrolling through houses in the San Antonio suburbs. New builds with small yards and open kitchens. We talked about school districts like we were already planning 5 years ahead. I built spreadsheets projecting down payments, closing costs, what we'd need to save monthly to move by next spring. She talked about Seattle too. A trip in the fall when the air turned crisp and the city felt cinematic. She wanted coffee shop photos in Pike Place, mist over the water, something different. I priced flights one afternoon during lunch and texted her 3 options. She sent back a heart emoji. That was the version of us I held on to. When she started coming home later, it didn't register as a threat. Photography runs late, especially golden hour sessions. Then it became client meetings. Then drinks after networking events. I told myself growth required visibility, exposure, effort. The first few times she picked fights, they were small. I loaded the dishwasher wrong. I didn't react enthusiastically enough to a new lens she wanted. I forgot to compliment her haircut immediately when she walked in. Each issue was minor, but the tone wasn't. There was an edge to it, like she was testing something. I responded the way I always had. Calm, practical. I'd say, if something's bothering you, just tell me directly. I thought clarity solved tension. In my world, it usually did. But the fights weren't about dishes or lenses. They were about friction, about her pushing against something solid and not getting the reaction she expected. She started calling me safe, in a way that didn't sound like a compliment. "You're steady," she'd say, but her eyes would drift toward her phone. "You're predictable." I heard stability. She meant something else. Still, I blamed stress. I blamed inconsistent income. I blamed myself for maybe being too routine. I adjusted where I could. Suggested date nights. Booked a reservation at a place downtown she liked. Took a Friday off so we could drive out toward Dripping Springs and just reset. She was physically there, but not fully engaged. Her laugh came half a second too late. Her attention moved quickly back to her screen. I saw it. I just didn't want to name it. Looking back, the indifference wasn't sudden. It was incremental, a slow withdrawal disguised as busyness. And I kept filling the space she left, believing effort could outpace distance. It never does. The shift didn't happen the night she confessed. That was impact. The shift came weeks earlier, quiet enough that I almost missed it. It was a Thursday evening. She was in the kitchen, talking fast about a branding shoot that had run long. I was at the dining table with my laptop open, pretending to review vendor contracts. I remember watching the reflection of her in the dark screen instead of looking at her directly. She said I didn't understand her ambition. She said I was comfortable with average. She said I was boring. Normally, I would have responded point by point, asked what she needed, offered to adjust. I'd done that before, tried to turn her frustration into something actionable. But that night, I just listened. Not passively, not wounded, just attentive. Her words weren't new. The phrasing changed, but the message had been repeating for months. Predictable, safe, too kind, no edge. It formed a clean line when I stepped back far enough to see it. This wasn't dissatisfaction with circumstances. It was dissatisfaction with me. And more than that, it was comparison. There was a tone underneath her complaints, something almost rehearsed, like she'd already framed me in a certain light somewhere else. Like I was the responsible footnote in a different, more exciting narrative. When she paused, waiting for my defense, I didn't give one. She frowned slightly. "You're not even going to argue?" I shook my head once. "I'm listening." That unsettled her more than anger would have. That's when I realized something important. She didn't want resolution. She wanted reaction, friction, proof that I could be provoked. For the first time, I stopped trying to win back ground I hadn't actually lost. I stopped explaining why stability mattered. I stopped reminding her what we were building. I started observing. I noticed how quickly her mood lifted when her phone buzzed. I noticed how she positioned herself slightly away from me on the couch, angling the screen out of view. I noticed how the criticism always intensified after certain nights out. Instead of countering it, I cataloged it. Patterns don't shout. They repeat. The word boring stopped feeling like an insult and started sounding like justification. The word predictable sounded like preparation. If I was already defined as lacking something, then crossing a line would feel less severe. It was subtle, but the emotional equation had changed. I wasn't trying to repair anything anymore. I was measuring distance. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. That night at the table, while she explained how she needed more, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not despair, clarity. This wasn't a rough season. It was a decision being made in slow motion. And for the first time, I stopped searching for excuses on her behalf. I just paid attention. The night she told me she'd slept with someone else, I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them yet. What I needed was structure. The next morning, I went to work like usual. Same drive down Mopac. Same podcast playing low through the speakers. I parked in the same spot near the side entrance and sat there for a minute longer than normal, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the reality settle into something usable. By lunchtime, I had scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney in Dallas. I chose Dallas deliberately, far enough from Austin to avoid overlap, close enough to drive without drawing attention. I used my personal email, not the shared one. Paid the consultation fee with my own card. There was no adrenaline in it. No dramatic, "this is over" speech running through my head. Just steps. That afternoon, I opened a separate checking account at a different bank. Not to hide money. To separate clarity from chaos. I rerouted my direct deposit. Adjusted automatic payments for the bills I intended to keep covering until things were formal. I printed the last 6 months of statements and stored them in a folder in my desk drawer at work. When I got home, Megan was on the couch editing photos. She looked up briefly and asked how my day was. "Normal," I said, and it was. On the surface. Inside, something had already shifted into place. I stopped trying to prove I loved her. I stopped offering reassurance when she grew distant. I stopped initiating conversations about future plans. The Zillow tab stayed closed. The Seattle flight alerts expired in my inbox. She seemed almost relieved at first. The tension she'd been provoking wasn't there to feed on anymore. Without resistance, her irritation lost its momentum. She started watching me more closely, like she was waiting for a delayed explosion. It never came. I began documenting instead of debating. Dates, she came home after midnight. Nights, she said she had client dinners. Any unusual withdrawals from our joint account. I wasn't building a case out of anger. I was building a timeline out of discipline. The attorney in Dallas was measured. He asked practical questions. Assets. Length of marriage. Joint debts. I answered calmly. He didn't need emotional context. He needed facts. Driving back to Austin after that meeting, I felt an unexpected steadiness. Not because I was winning anything, but because I had stopped reacting and started positioning. At home, nothing looked different. I still washed dishes, still took out trash, still spoke in the same even tone. But internally, I had already left the marriage. What remained was logistics. And logistics, I understood. Once I stopped reacting, the details became easier to see. Patterns don't hide when you're not arguing with them. Her late shoots began clustering around the same nights: Thursday, Friday, sometimes Sunday evenings. The explanation was always phrased the same way. It ran long. We grabbed drinks after. It's good for networking. The wording shifted slightly, but the structure didn't. I started checking timestamps without making it obvious. The parking garage receipt she left on the kitchen counter. The geotag on a photo she posted publicly. A rooftop bar downtown appeared more than once in the background of other people's stories she'd been tagged in. I didn't confront her. I wrote it down. The phone changed too. It used to rest casually on the coffee table, screen lighting up without concern. Now it was always face down, always within reach. If I walked into a room unexpectedly, her hand would shift subtly, not dramatic, just enough to close something. Her irritation spiked when I stayed calm. That part interested me. If I asked, "What time do you think you'll be back?" she'd answer with edge. "Why does it matter?" If I shrugged and said, "Just planning my evening," she'd study my face like she was searching for accusation that wasn't there. Calmness unsettled her more than suspicion would have. One Saturday, she said she had a sunset session near downtown. I finished a project at home and drove out later. Not to follow her, not to confront, but to test alignment. I parked a block away from the rooftop lounge I'd seen tagged before. I sat in my truck and watched the entrance for 15 minutes. She walked in wearing the same jacket she'd left the apartment in. No camera bag. That was enough. I didn't take pictures. I didn't storm inside. I didn't text her. I started the engine and drove home. Back at the apartment, I opened my laptop and updated the timeline. Date, time, location. No commentary, just facts. Over the next few weeks, the alignment became consistent. Late nights mapped cleanly to that same rooftop. Increased defensiveness followed the next morning. Complaints about me being emotionally flat surfaced whenever I didn't react. The facts didn't need interpretation anymore. They simply accumulated. What struck me most wasn't the deception itself. It was the predictability of it. For someone who accused me of being boring and routine, her behavior followed a schedule. Meanwhile, I maintained mine. Work, gym, groceries, bills paid on time. I shifted more of my personal documents into a secure folder at the office. Copied tax returns, insurance policies, vehicle titles. Externally, nothing dramatic changed. Internally, the observation phase was complete. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I had clarity. And clarity doesn't require confrontation. It requires patience. When I told her I wanted a divorce, it was a Tuesday evening. No build-up. No speech. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, half listening to music. I waited until she looked up. "I've spoken to an attorney," I said. "I'm filing." At first, she blinked like she hadn't heard me correctly. Then came the defensive posture. Arms crossed. Chin tilted slightly upward. "So that's it?" she asked. "That's it." There was a pause where I could see calculation happening behind her eyes. She didn't deny the affair. Not immediately. Instead, she shifted the frame. "You're overreacting." I held her gaze. Calm. Neutral. "I know about the rooftop," I said. "And I know it wasn't just once." That's when she exhaled and looked away. "It wasn't supposed to turn into this," she said quietly. "The bartender. That's who he was. Someone she'd met during one of her networking nights. He worked at the rooftop lounge downtown. Younger. Charismatic in the way men who live off tips and attention tend to be." She said it like she was describing weather. But it didn't stop there. Within days of the conversation, pieces started moving outside our apartment walls. Her friend Lauren stopped responding to her texts. I didn't know why at first. Then I heard the name. The bartender wasn't just some random guy from a bar. He was Lauren's boyfriend. The timeline I had built in silence suddenly intersected with someone else's reality. I didn't contact Lauren. I didn't expose anything. I didn't need to. Megan had already told the truth to defend herself from rumors that were starting to circulate. Austin isn't small, but social circles overlap, especially in creative communities. The fallout wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Lauren cut her off. Completely. No confrontation, just distance. A few of Megan's regular clients stopped booking. One brand collaboration quietly disappeared from her calendar. Word travels in subtle ways when trust is involved. At her part-time studio job, tension followed. Someone had tagged the bartender in a photo from a night Megan claimed she was out of town on a shoot. The dates didn't align. An internal review started, not because of morality, but because she'd logged billable hours during time she hadn't been working. What began as her search for excitement became administrative. Consequences rarely explode. They accumulate. At home, the apartment felt smaller. Not heavier, just smaller, like the walls had moved in a few inches. She tried, briefly, to reframe the narrative. Said she'd been confused. Said I'd been emotionally unavailable. Said she'd needed something different. I didn't argue. This was no longer about betrayal alone. It was about alignment between actions and outcomes. And that alignment was no longer mine to manage. It had been a little over 4 months since I moved out when she showed up. By then, I was living in a smaller rental house in the Houston suburbs. Nothing impressive. 2 bedrooms, neutral walls, a small patch of grass out back that I kept trimmed on Saturdays. The kind of place that didn't demand attention. It suited me. I saw her car through the front window before she knocked. She stood on the porch like she wasn't sure she belonged there. No dramatic entrance. No tears already falling. Just a kind of hesitation I hadn't seen in her before. When I opened the door, she looked thinner, tired in a way that wasn't aesthetic. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside and let her in, not out of obligation, just to avoid turning the conversation into a scene for the neighbors. We sat at the small dining table. No photos on the walls yet. No shared furniture. Everything in that room was chosen after the divorce paperwork was finalized. She started quickly, like she'd rehearsed it on the drive over. "I made a mistake." I didn't interrupt. I thought I wanted something different. I thought I needed excitement. But none of it was real. Her hands were clasped tightly together on the table. "You were the only stable person in my life. The only one who actually loved me." The phrasing was familiar. Stability. Love. But the tone had changed. There was no irritation attached to those words now. She told me the bartender had moved on, that the social fallout hadn't repaired itself, that work had become uncomfortable, that she'd been staying with her parents outside Austin because things had gotten complicated. I let her finish. She was waiting for something from me. Anger. Relief. A crack in my composure she could step into. Instead, I kept my voice even. "She cheated because I was kind," I said. So I let her see the other side. It wasn't said with bitterness. It wasn't loud. It was simply a summary. Her eyes searched my face for more. For negotiation. For an opening. "There doesn't have to be an other side," she said softly. "There already is." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was clear. The same clarity I'd felt standing in that hallway months ago. I stood up first. "I hope you figure things out," I told her. That was all. I walked her to the door. No dramatic final words. No slammed door. Just the quiet click of it closing. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for a minute before pulling away. I didn't feel triumph. Just confirmation. Some doors don't need to be locked loudly to stay closed. After she left that afternoon, I didn't call anyone. I didn't replay the conversation in my head looking for sharper lines I could have delivered. I didn't check her social media. I didn't drive past anywhere connected to our old life. I made dinner. Grilled chicken. Rice. Same as any other Tuesday. There's a quiet discipline in doing ordinary things when something emotional has just happened. It keeps your footing steady. Over the next few weeks, I heard updates indirectly. Not because I was searching, but because mutual acquaintances still existed in the background. Austin and Houston aren't that far apart socially when you've built a shared life. She moved back in with her parents full-time. The rental we'd shared was long gone, and whatever temporary place she'd tried after that hadn't held. Her friend Lauren didn't reconcile. That bridge stayed down. At her studio job, the internal review escalated. I learned that through someone who used to handle vendor coordination with me. It wasn't about morality. It was about discrepancies. Logged hours. Location tags that didn't align. Professional trust, once questioned, doesn't reset easily. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing any of it. Consequences aren't something you celebrate. There's something you respect. What struck me most was how little I needed to be involved. I had imagined, early on, that there would be a temptation to expose details, to defend my name, to correct narratives. But none of that was necessary. The truth had its own momentum. My role was simply absence. I kept my routine intact. Work remained steady. I took on an additional operations project that required tighter oversight, more travel within Texas. I accepted it without hesitation. Structure has always been something I can rely on. At home, the space stayed quiet. No raised voices. No tension humming under the surface. I noticed small things. The way I could leave my phone on the counter without thinking about it. The way evenings stretched without unpredictability. Peace isn't dramatic. It's subtle. There were moments, usually late at night, when I considered the version of myself that would have fought harder to keep the marriage intact. The version that would have absorbed blame to preserve stability. I didn't judge him. I understood him. But I wasn't him anymore. I didn't interfere with her circumstances. I didn't check on her beyond a single necessary email about final paperwork. Everything was handled through attorneys, clean and documented. Events unfolded on their own timeline. The fallout that had once seemed catastrophic from inside our apartment now felt procedural from a distance. And distance, I realized, is sometimes the most honest boundary a person can set. I didn't celebrate her downfall. There was no moment where I leaned back in a chair and felt vindicated. No quiet toast to karma. What happened to her after the divorce wasn't something I orchestrated, and it wasn't something I took pride in. It was simply the outcome of choices. For a while, people expected me to be angry. A few coworkers, once they learned I was divorced, tested the edges of the story with careful questions. Rough split. What happened? I kept my answers short. We wanted different things. That was enough. Anger is loud. It demands witnesses. I didn't need any. What I felt instead was a gradual unwinding. The tension I'd grown used to, measuring moods, anticipating criticism, adjusting tone, slowly disappeared. I hadn't realized how much mental space that vigilance occupied until it was gone. Kindness was never the flaw, but it had been misplaced. For a long time, I had treated stability like a shared asset, something we were both investing in. When she framed it as boring, I tried to repackage it. Add novelty, increase emotional output, make it more attractive. I see now that stability only holds value for someone who wants it. Without that alignment, it becomes something to push against. I stopped being her safety net the day I stopped arguing for my own worth. I didn't withdraw affection to punish her. I withdrew access to myself to protect what was left intact. There's a difference. The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama. No public statements. Just signatures and a stamped document that formalized what had already dissolved months earlier. Afterward, I drove home alone and parked in my driveway. I sat there for a minute, engine off, listening to the ticking sound of cooling metal under the hood. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. The version of me who stood in that hallway in Austin holding a folder of organized plans believed that kindness could prevent collapse. He thought patience would be reciprocated. He thought effort would be matched. He wasn't weak. He was sincere. And sincerity doesn't guarantee loyalty. It simply reveals character on both sides. What remains now isn't resentment. It's clarity. I didn't lose my kindness. I just stopped offering it without discernment. And that distinction changed everything. Now I live in a smaller place than the one we shared. Less square footage. Fewer rooms. No second bedroom filled with half-finished ideas. Just what I use, what I maintain, what I choose. There's no tension in the walls here. No waiting for a key to turn in the lock at an unpredictable hour. Evenings are quiet in a way that feels earned, not empty. I still wake up early. Still go to work. Still pay my bills on time. I still hold doors open for strangers and answer emails with patience. None of that changed. What changed is access. Kindness isn't something I withdrew from the world. It's something I now pair with boundaries. I listen more carefully to patterns. I take words at face value, but I verify them against actions. If something feels misaligned, I don't argue it into place anymore. I step back. Sometimes I think about that hallway in Austin. The folder in my hands. The way she said I was too kind, like it was a flaw that needed correction. She was wrong about that. Kindness isn't weakness. It's only dangerous when you give it to someone who mistakes it for permission. Now, I'm still kind. I'm just no longer anyone's safety net. And the peace that comes with that is quiet, steady, and entirely my own. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.